What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's super interesting, I think, to a lot of our viewers, and something that I know a lot of people have questions about, and that is web scraping, and specifically how it relates to GDPR. Web scraping, I think a lot of people know what it is, but basically it's like having a little robot that goes out there on the internet and collects information for you from all sorts of different websites. Super powerful tool, but obviously we've got this thing called the General Data Protection Regulation, better known as GDPR. That kind of throws a wrench in things a little bit, especially if you're dealing with data from folks in the EU.
Right.
So the question is, can you actually still use web scraping without, getting in trouble with the law? And to help us answer that question, we've got our expert here who knows all about GDPR.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here to shed some light on this. This whole thing with GDPR, it can seem really intimidating.
Yeah.
Especially when you start hearing about these massive fines that companies are getting hit with. But the truth is, it's not about trying to make life difficult for businesses or anything like that.
Right.
It's really about protecting people's privacy. And that's something I think we can all get behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to web scraping, the big thing to remember is that GDPR applies to any organization that handles data from individuals in the EU.
Okay, so it doesn't matter where you're located.
Exactly.
If you're collecting data from someone in the EU,
GDPR is going to be on your radar.
GDPR has something to say about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. So even if you're, a small business operating in the U.S. Or anywhere else in the world for that matter,
Well, it doesn't matter.
you've got to be mindful of GDPR.
If you're dealing with EU data, GDPR applies.
Okay, so the reach is huge.
Yeah, the reach is global.
That's a really important point. So let's get specific now. Like, how does this actually play out when we're talking about web scraping? Like, where do the two collide?
Well, the main thing to remember is that GDPR is all about protecting personal data.
Okay.
So we're talking about things like names, email addresses, physical addresses, online identifiers like IP addresses, anything that can be used to identify a specific individual.
Right.
And this is where web scraping can run into trouble.
Okay.
Because if you're not careful, you could end up collecting all sorts of personal data without even realizing it.
And you can't just collect it for any reason.
Exactly. You need a valid legal basis for collecting that data. And GDPR lays out very specific grounds for data collection.
Like what?
Things like consent, contractual necessity, legal obligation.
Okay.
So you can't just scrape data because you think it might be useful someday. You have to have a specific purpose in mind, and that purpose has to align with one of those legal grounds.
Okay, so there are some rules here.
Yeah, there are definitely rules.
But I think a lot of people, they hear about these rules, they're like, okay, whatever.
Right.
Like, are the consequences really that serious?
Well, let me put it this way. Ignoring GDPR is not a risk you want to take. The fines for non-compliance can be absolutely massive. I mean, we're talking millions of euros.
Give me some examples, like what kind of fines are we talking about?
Oh, yeah, I've got some good ones for you.
Okay.
So remember British Airways back in 2018?
Yep, vaguely.
They got hit with a whopping £20 million fine.
For what?
A data breach.
What happened?
Hackers were able to access customer data, including names, email addresses, and even credit card information.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and it cost them a lot of money.
So that's because they didn't have proper security measures in place?
Exactly. They failed to take appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect that data.
Okay, what else?
All right, so then you've got Marriott International.
The hotel chain.
The hotel chain, that's right.
Okay.
They were fined £18.4 million for another data breach.
Another one?
Yeah. This time, the breach affected over 300 million guest records.
Okay, so this is like a recurring theme.
Yeah, unfortunately, data breaches are all too common.
All right, well, what about a company that's not, an airline or a hotel chain?
Sure.
What about, like, a retailer?
Okay, well, how about H&M?
Oh, yeah.
They were fined 35 million euros for collecting excessive data on their employees.
What do you mean by excessive?
Well, they were keeping track of things like their employees' religious beliefs, health details, family issues, even like what they were having for lunch.
Really?
Yeah, way too much information.
Wow.
And they didn't have a valid legal basis for collecting all of that data.
So GDPR is not messing around.
No, they're definitely serious about enforcing these rules.
So what can companies do to avoid becoming another GDPR horror story?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the good news is there are a lot of things companies can do to stay on the right side of GDPR.
Like what?
First and foremost, minimize the amount of data you collect.
Okay.
Only collect what you absolutely need for your specific purpose.
Don't be greedy with data.
Exactly.
Okay, what else?
Anonymize the data you do collect whenever possible.
What do you mean by anonymize?
So that means removing any information that could be used to identify an individual.
Okay.
So for example, if you're collecting data for market research, you might not need people's full names or addresses. You
Right.
could just use a unique identifier instead.
And that way, if there's a breach, no one's personal information is at risk.
Exactly.
Okay, anonymized data, got it. What else?
All right, so this one's important. Follow the rules.
Got it. Okay, so minimize data, anonymized data, follow the rules. Are we good to go?
Well, not so fast. GDPR compliance isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Okay.
Things change, your data needs evolve, new technologies emerge. So you need to be constantly assessing your practices and making sure you're still in compliance.
So regular risk assessments are important.
Absolutely crucial.
Documentation.
Documentation.
Really?
Yeah, it's super important to keep records of what data you're collecting, why you're collecting it, how you're protecting it.
Okay.
Not only does this help you stay organized, but it also demonstrates your commitment to GDPR compliance if you ever get audited.
Okay, so document everything.
Document everything.
Got it.
And make sure everyone involved in data collection is properly trained on GDPR. You don't want to have someone on your team who doesn't understand the rules and accidentally puts your company at risk.
Right, so it's not just about, setting things up and forgetting about them.
No, it's an ongoing process.
You've got to stay on top of it.
You got to stay vigilant.
Got it. So what's the bottom line for our viewers today?
The bottom line is web scraping can be an incredibly powerful tool, but it's not a free-for-all.
Okay.
You have to approach it with a sense of responsibility
Right.
and a deep understanding of GDPR.
So how do we as a society, ensure that we're using this technology ethically?
That's a great question. And I think it's a question that we all need to be asking ourselves. How can we balance the benefits of web scraping with the ethical responsibility of protecting individual privacy?
What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. See you all next time.